how do I see the future of wine communication? So, Felicity gets a call out here. The journalists, there are not many journalists. We need journalists in wine just as we do in every other topic. There will be good wine journalists. Not very many of them, and the thing about those wine journalists is quite possibly, like Felicity, they will publish themselves. They will have a Substack, or they will be doing podcasts or whatever, because they may not have a magazine or a newspaper prepared to pay them.
Welcome to the Wine to Wine Vinitaly Business Forum 2025 Chicago edition, where global wine professionals share insights, strategies, and inspiration from this year's conference. Let's dive into today's session and explore the ideas shaping the future of wine.
So, Robert Joseph, he is a winemaker. He's just, in terms of communication, extraordinaire. So today, it's every time I save him for the last. He gets mad, but because I know he can close up Wine to Wine. Robert, why don't you just start?
Following Felicity is never easy, but I've got one or two answers to some of the things that she was saying. The idea of make wine writing great again, I think is a theme that we could think about. And one of the things I'm going to question is whether wine writing was ever great or when it was ever great. So, first wine writer, quite possibly Pliny the Elder, and going back a long time, and he actually wrote more about wine than anybody did for hundreds of years after that. And our modern equivalent here is Sandy, I think, and she is showing how to make new mom friends at soccer games. It's very easy. You take orange juice and you mix it with white wine, obviously. And she has 525,000 likes for that on TikTok. No, she's real. No, she's real. Well, I'll tell you. These are some of the early wine writers from the 1920s. On the left, George Saintsbury, very famous British wine writer. André Simon, famous for one thing. When he was near death, he was a year off dying, he worked out that if he worked really hard, he could drink all his wine before he died, so he didn't have to leave any to his kids. He was a wine merchant. Edmund Penning Rousell was Jancis Robinson's predecessor at the Financial Times. He was known as a Bollinger Bolshevik, famous for going to Bordeaux, and he didn't drive, somebody drove for him, and he was known in French as Monsieur Coffre Ouvert, meaning Mr. Open Boot, because somehow or other the trunk of his car was always open so that you could put a case of wine in before he left. He was not a great wine writer, but he was very famous and he had a wonderful moustache. Alexis Lachine, Sacha Lachine of Whispering Angels' father, Chateau Prieur Lachine. He was a man who thankfully left this earth before Me Too ever came along, because he would have had real problems with that. He had a lot of young female staff at that chateau. And then you've got Frank Schoonmaker, who was interesting because he was a spy. Peter Sichel was a spy, and Frank Schoonmaker, he was an American who wrote wine books. I'll come back to G.B. Stern and Len Challoner in a minute. Robert Parker, you know. Hugh Johnson, you know. Frank Pryal, who had a side hustle doing theatre criticism. Michael Broadbent, who did ride that bicycle until quite late in his life. And one of my friends, Oz Clarke. Now, G.B. Stern and Len Challoner. Did you notice anything about all those people, the previous page? Anyone? All men. And G.B. Stern and Len Challoner, famous wine writers in the 1920s, were women. And there's a picture of G.B. Stern on the left, and I haven't got a picture of Len, but Len's real name was Lenore. So if you wanted to actually be a wine writer in those days, it helped to be a man. I thank Joe Fattorini for this information. Then we started to get women. Pamela Van Dyke Price, famous Times critic in the UK in the 1950s, 60s. Serena Sutcliffe, who went on to run Sotheby's. And then Ruth Ellen Church. Anyone heard of Ruth Ellen Church? First American wine writer, 1962 in Chicago. She wrote about food and wine, and there she looked quite good, actually. Now, publishing. My view of publishing, which is one I only came up with recently, is that it's a ménage à trois. What does that mean by that? Well, we have publishers, we have readers, and we have advertisers. I'm not talking about book publishing now, I'm talking about magazine and newspaper publishing. What that means is, if we have enough enthusiastic readers, we will have lots of advertising dollars and we will have a successful publication. If we don't have enough readers, we won't get the advertising dollars and we will not have a successful publication. Stevie, you mentioned Meiningers International earlier, which is defunct. What you didn't mention was that I started a magazine called Wine International in 1983. That is also defunct. I've been involved with several defunct magazines and publications, one way or the other. Why? Because we didn't have the advertising revenue to make them work. This is a page of top Amazon.com US wine and beverage books. This was this afternoon. So the ones in the circles are the wine books. Everything else is not wine. Everything else is cocktails and spirits and beer. And this, by the way, there are more wine circles today than last time I did this. But wine is not top of most people's interest levels. So that actually means we haven't got enough readers. Then we haven't got enough advertisers, and the advertisers were leaving the print world anyway, but wine wasn't keeping them in there. And then we've got the loss of circulation, which is pretty dramatic. And then we've got the loss of print influence. And you could say it's all migrated online, but it hasn't. Now I'm going to give you a personal view, which I just thought I might as well because I'm here. So 1955, that mewling infant there was not me. That's a picture from the net. But assume that was me, February 1955. 1955 is quite a long time ago, and I quite like some of these things. So Sinatra was still popular. On the Waterfront was the movie. Eisenhower was president. The first McDonald's was born when I was born. Polio vaccine, so at least one official in America might be questioning the fact that that's 55 years old. And we had Miss Atomic Pageant. I just love that title. We just maybe wouldn't do today. And US wine consumption then was 0.88 gallons per person, 43 million in total. By 2021, it had gone up from 0.88 to 3.16. And then today, it's gone down to 2.54. So, 1960s was swinging London. I missed that, I was too young. 1970s was the hippie California. I was in the wrong place. I missed that. 1980s was the summer of love of wine in the UK. Anybody who was lucky enough to be in Britain between 1985 and 2000 actually had a moment where everybody was interested in wine. That did not happen in the US to the same extent. It happened a bit. It was the Parker period and everything else. But actually in the UK, we went from being a beer-drinking nation to being a wine-drinking nation, and genuinely we had wine on television, on the radio. People said, what's the new thing? Because we were being bombarded by new stuff. Australia, Chile, New Zealand, California, etc. It was an extraordinary moment. People came from all over the world to the London Wine Fair to find out what was happening. But it didn't last. It was a moment. But I lived through that moment, ladies and gentlemen. I wrote all those books. Whether they're any good or not is not the point. I churned those books out, over 25 of them. I was a pioneer, ladies and gentlemen, in self-publishing. I produced this book for the Tesco supermarket, our biggest supermarket. Oz Clarke, who I mentioned earlier, had, through a publishing house, done a book for Sainsbury's, the other big supermarket. So I thought, I can do that. I went along to Tesco's. I got a partner to help me do the publishing bit, and I said, Tesco's, can I do a book for you? And we did this deal, 35,000 copies, $7 a copy for a full A4, full color book with recipes and so on. We didn't make much money on it, but it was a reasonably good deal, and we delivered it to Tesco's, and it was brilliant, and we managed to sell about 15,000 of them through the supermarket, and they were moving quite slowly, so the supermarket decided to do what supermarkets do. They discounted it to $4. and it still didn't sell. So what we discovered was people buying stuff in a supermarket during the time, which was the summer of love of wine, were not sufficiently interested to buy a book on wine. And it wasn't just my book on wine, because other supermarkets, other wine merchants' books on wine also failed. But that book was republished, repackaged. Pretty much the same book, updated a bit. Price has gone up now to $35 from $7. Different cover. And that's been republished 3 times, or was. It's a bit out of date now. That works. It taught me something that you would learn in wine, that repackage the same wine and put it out to different people in a different way, and you may be able to make it work. Gifts. By the way, I used to go to bookshops. I did an annual wine guide. I used to go to bookshops to sign books, and I used to also go to watch people buying my book. It was a really nice feeling. I loved the people walking my book, and I'd say, oh, that's right. Why were they buying it? They were buying it as a gift before Christmas. It was the right price for what we would call a stocking filler book. And do you know where I found my book in January? In the charity shops. All of those uncles and fathers and godfathers who'd been given those books quite often just took them along to the charity shop, and there they still were. What I used to like, that was a newspaper I used to write for, the Sunday Telegraph, and I used to like to write these think pieces. And they were immodestly not too bad. I got some prizes from the think pieces I used to write. This is what the readers wanted. A whole set of recommendations of what to buy in Tesco's or Sainsbury's or whatever supermarket. They really did not want to read the wonderful prose I had to write about my trip to Piemonte and my meeting with Chiara Boschis for the first time. No, just tell us what to buy. This was my book that we published every year, which was a buying guide. That was a bestseller, 100,000 copies. Forget all the other books I did about the wines of the Americas or the rest. This was the one that sold. And last week, Tom Walk actually wrote that when he asked readers, or when he checked on what readers were looking at, what they wanted most was stuff on wine travel and what to buy. Exactly what you heard the wine enthusiast talking about earlier. So, that essentially hasn't changed in 30 years. So I gave up being a wine critic in 2005 because I discovered I was suffering from a mental condition. I don't normally share this in public, but I am, because we all share this sort of thing. My mental condition was that I found I was talking to myself. I'd been to the 10th dinner party at which the person sitting next to me, who knew more about opera and politics and sailing and everything else, did not know that Chablis was made from Chardonnay. And I thought, I have written this 1 million times. And all of my friends have been writing, or my wine writing friends have written it 1 million times. And they didn't know whether Malbec was a grape or a region or whatever. And I thought, I am wasting my time. I am talking to myself. All of my colleagues were also talking to themselves. So I gave up. I also then started to make wine. One of the reasons I started to make wine was I had a son that year, and I realized he would need clothes and food. And we were already beginning to move into the blogging time. And there were brilliant bloggers writing about wine better than I did, or with more good information in it, because these guys, they didn't have a life. They didn't go to the pub. They didn't watch television. They actually spent their evenings swatting up about wine and talking to wine people and so on. And they wrote brilliant blogs for which they wanted no money. So I thought, I can't compete with those. So the other thing that I was aware of at that time, as a wine critic who used to go on press trips and all sorts of things, wine producers had too little money to spend on proper marketing. And they still do. They believed that good wine sold itself. So all they had to do was to put the good wine in front of writers, and everything would magically happen. And I, as a critic, believed that. I don't believe that now, but I believed it then. This was the way things used to work. That at the bottom is not Gino Colangelo. It's a female PR person, but it's somebody doing Gino's, that's the task of a PR agency. So the man on the left has got a Castillo somewhere, He pays some money to her. She then sends all of those faces we may meet later on off to his place, and hopefully they write about his wine, and those people on the right, the consumers, read about it, and everybody is happy. Oh, by the way, that was me. I was part of that. I looked different then. What they did was they came back, and in theory, they contributed to these magazines, what I call wine puffs. Mr. Lovely, Mrs. Lovely makes lovely wine in their lovely estate in lovely land. I have read that article 1 million times. I have been an editor, I have been a judge at wine writing competitions, and basically I've seen it over and over again. There is no difference between wine advertorial and wine editorial. It's written by enthusiasts who just love the places and the people they're going to, and they're so grateful for the free airline ticket to go there and see these people that they write a thank you letter in the media. And when they can't do it in a magazine, they do it in a blog. But it's the same thing. In theory, there was a problem. Before blogs came along, they had to deal with the editor. And back in the day, my first editor was Jancis Robinson, and that's what she did. And one of my more recent editors, as you heard, was Felicity Carter, who you met earlier. So that was Jancis when she was my editor, and we haven't got a picture. Now, let's just go off to one side. Wine books. These are 5 really good wine books that you may have come across: Cork Talk, Billionaire's Vinegar, Tangle Wines, and so on. What do all these books have in common? They're written by people who write other stuff about stuff that isn't wine. Very little investigative stuff about wine has been written by wine writers. So, who broke the story of Rudy Kurniawan? Which wine writer hero actually went to the front page of which newspaper or magazine and said, hey, there's this guy who's faking wine? None of them. It was the Wine Berserkers group. Who broke the story of the fact that if you paid $100 for bottles of white Burgundy, 2 bottles out of every case would probably be dead on arrival? Which wine writer? It was, and this was the text that I picked up. A few journalists beat the drum, but many talked purely in vague generalities, continued to enjoy their tastings at the domains they knew full well were the most affected. Along with the trade, they happily recommended and or sold wines to you and me when they knew that one bottle. So we as wine writers, in the great period of when wine writing was great, were not doing a great job. And to be honest, I was a wine writer in those times. I was not sufficiently investigative. So I think we all need to give a lot of thought to what being a wine writer is being about. But what it is not often about is being a wine journalist. In other words, going and asking the questions. And to her credit, Jancis Robinson is a journalist. Felicity, you've met earlier, is a journalist. There are not that many. Blake Gray in California is a journalist. There are not that many of them around. The thing that has changed since the days of those editors is we now have quantifiability. The editor when I was a wine writer who said, our readers want recommendations, the way they did that was they had a questionnaire they sent out to the readers every now and then saying, what do you like? We did that with Wine Magazine, and we said, which bits of Wine Magazine do you like best? And I thought, what they're going to say best is Robert Joseph's pieces. No, what they wanted more was vintage charts. That came top of the list. But now we have quantifiability. Now we know which bits online people are looking at. We know how long they're looking at it for. We know where they go after they've looked at it. And if you talk to the wine enthusiast, one of their real skills is data now. They publish articles on stuff they know that people are going to like, and the writers who write the pieces that more people read get more work. That's a huge difference. Now, this is something I just looked at, and looking at Google Trends is not perfect. There are all sorts of things against it, but it does give you some indications. What I looked at here was, and you can't see it very easily on the chart, but there I've got natural wine and XXL, and bourbon barrel wine. And the interesting thing is that's the difference between New York, Texas, Florida, and California. And the red bars on the top is XXL 16% wine that many of my wine writer friends do not even know about or think about or write about. But look at it, in New York and Florida, there are people who are interested in it who are not being served by traditional wine writers, which makes me think of the late, great Chicagoan Roger Ebert, who, as a film critic, did not stick to art films. He would cover every film that came out, and I question how many wine critics are as ready to taste a wide range of popular wines as he was in terms of movies. So now we have the new model. We now have influencers. Actually, the winemaker there is paying the influencer directly, or he's going via the PR. We have an event called the Vino Influencers Award in Spain that just happened. And the interesting thing is the event is seen as a networking event at which the influencers can meet their clients, the wineries. As a wine critic, I used to think anybody who took money from a winery or from a distributor was somebody I didn't want anything to do with. I was impartial. I accepted the trips. I wasn't as good as maybe the Wine Spectator, which said you can't have a cup of coffee, but essentially I didn't go anywhere that I didn't already know I liked the wine. So I would never go and write nice things about wine I didn't like. These guys are taking money from producers to write about them. But that's doing the same thing. Basically, they are being the marketing people for the wineries in the way that I was a marketing person for the winery. It's a cleaner relationship. So let's look at the future. The 1960s wine writer. I'm just going to go quickly through how things have changed. The one female wine writer in the 1980s, the TV presenters, the scorer, the food and drink program, the blogger, the infographer, and you heard in the Wine Enthusiast, that's one of the most popular things. Lady Penguin, who I'm referencing here in China, became hugely successful and put out her own brand of wine, and she had investors in her. And she's gone now. But she had that moment at which everyone believed that paying influencers, investing in them was the thing. It did not last. It was 2010s. The podcasters, the wine podcasters, the influencer, and now the wine AI. And I'm now going to come into that. So this is something that I've only just discovered, and it's called Pressmaster AI, and it is not doing the same thing as ChatGPT, I discovered. So what it does is it wants to help your brand or turn you into a thought leader. It's not that expensive. It's like $12 a month or $72 a month if you want the full service. And you set up your brand voice. Now, what it does is it interviews you. And having interviewed you, it then actually takes, and it does that in a conversational way. And in a minute, I'll show some of the questions. But a bit like Felicity was saying about how you deal with ChatGPT, it can be quite confrontational in the way it responds to your answers, but it then stitches your answers back. So essentially what you're given is exactly what you would be given by a journalist who had taken notes on what you'd said on an interview and put them all back together. And very often those journalists don't do it very well, and this service doesn't do it brilliantly, but you can tidy it up, and it is actually your words on the topic. But what's really interesting, and this page you can't see very well, it will give you topics. So, as of now, death of wine intimidation, why the casual cheek is killing sommelier culture. Terroir blending is the new single vineyard, why diversity beats purity. Mediterranean moderation will destroy big alcohol wine marketing. A Bay Area chef retreated from restaurants, now they're at a Napa restaurant. In other words, every day they will come up with topics that might be stuff that will be read by people online. You will then, if you want, be interviewed by the bot, and it will then give you the text back which is your words on the topic. So if I want to talk about Le Grand Noir, my French wine, their topic might be people want lower alcohol wine, and I can answer a lot of questions in which I will put some references to the fact that my wines are 13% rather than 14.5%, and I will have a blog post on a topic that the AI has told me are interesting. It's not perfect. It's a long way from perfect, but it's a long way better than saying, hey, ChatGPT, write me something. The sort of questions, the sort of responses I had in a piece were, how do we get young people to drink wine? I said, maybe we could use role models. You mentioned role models. Gen Z is notoriously skeptical of traditional celebrity endorsement, et cetera, et cetera. It knocks back in quite a human way, because that's what it's trained to do, and it's training me to give responses that would be potentially interesting to read. So let's go on to the end, because I think we're roughly on time. How do I see the future of wine communication? So Felicity gets a call out here. The journalists, there are not many journalists. We need journalists in wine just as we do in every other topic. There will be good wine journalists. Not very many of them. And the thing about those wine journalists is quite possibly, like Felicity, they will publish themselves. They will have a Substack, or they will be doing podcasts or whatever, because they may not have a magazine or a newspaper prepared to pay them. There will be the specialist. Second in is Jane Anson, who is a Bordeaux specialist, who has built a reputation for being the person who knows about Bordeaux. And there will be people who will do exactly the same thing. And Matt, who's here, potentially could be saying he's spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe, and I could see him being the go-to person on, for example, Georgia or one or two other regions, if that's what he wanted to do. Contentiously, number 3 is a wine critic, who I won't happen to name. I don't think it does name him there, or maybe it does. Anyway, basically a wine critic who runs events. And basically the event is a very profitable place, because I, as a producer who's had 90 points, get to have a table, and other people pay money to come and taste my wines. It's a brilliant model, because essentially the audience are having a good time, they're tasting nice wines, I'm paying money for my table, and he's raking in the money. You could question whether there's ever a conflict of interest as a critic when you are giving marks, scores to people who might or might not exhibit at your events, but it is something that is now a reality. By the same token, I have another friend who gives scores, somebody, Tim Atkin, who I trust implicitly. He goes to South Africa, does a report. He goes to Argentina, does a report. People who get 90 points or whatever can buy stickers. Tim makes more money from the stickers than he does from selling the reports. So, there's that as well. Then we've got Sandy, the TikToker. She's going to be around there. Then we've got Jancis, who is just a model. And, Venus we could take, and others. She's a critic publisher. People ever forget, JancisRobinson.com is a business. It was bought as a business. There are employees, there are contributors, and so on. And potentially, maybe not while Jancis is around, but Jancis Robinson could be an event-running business as well, maybe not when she's here. Our influence is going to be here, and as I just said earlier, I think that she is as valid for the wine industry as I was as a wine critic. And now I am going to say something that I am shocked at myself for saying, which is that as the co-owner of Le Grand Noir, yes, I want some critics to visit me, but will I pay an influencer who might help me sell my wine? Why wouldn't I? If that's going to work, because what I need to do to feed my children is sell wine. And actually, those influencers may be more effective than Robert Joseph when he was a wine writer, depending on the editor who might not publish words that might not ever have been read. Then obviously we've got Karen, who's one of my heroes in many ways, but you see what Karen describes herself as. She is a consultant, she's a motivational speaker. She is not just a wine critic, although that is something she does supremely well. And then we've got the AI I've just said, which is, to me, And in answer to Felicity, wine.com is using ChatGPT to write the short pieces. They're not writing the long pieces, but the bits that go out in the newsletter saying, we've got a new Merlot on offer for €5 or $5 or whatever. It can do that very well in the way that Reuters is using AI for its business reports and its sports reports, because those are being done as badly or as well as the human writers used to do them. So my point is, AI sommeliers are never going to be as good as a real sommelier, but there aren't many great sommeliers in the way of things. There are huge numbers of restaurants that don't have a sommelier. And if there is an AI model that will help recommend wine to customers, that will happen. There is not a lot of great writing. There's not a lot of great copywriting. AI copywriting will be as good as a lot of copywriting, and I can see, just as we heard about OpenAI employing a human being to run things, I can see human beings who are today journalists sitting there and sifting through what the AI has done today, correcting a few things, but it will be the basic stuff. So I have a new Substack. Please follow me on it. It's free, but it won't be free for everybody very soon. And there's my wine, and these are 2 books coming out, one in the next 3 months, which is Wine Thinking, which Felicity has been very helpful in helping to edit, and The Wine People, and this is me. Thank you all very much.
All right, let's give it up for Robert Joseph.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, cin cin.